We are live. I need to get a better catchphrase than that. That's too generic. But we are live. We're back for episode 3 of this legendary now Aristotle Metaphysics series, where we systematically just make this guy naked. We expose him for the fraud that he is. No, that's not true. We love Aristotle, but today the topic of discussion may not be so centered around Aristotle because we're in the part of the book in the metaphysics in book Alpha in chapters 9 and 10 predominantly, where we're going to have to talk about someone else who's lurking in the corner always whenever we talk about this Greek polymath god. He goes by the name Plato. So we'll kind of be talking about Plato a lot so that we can properly understand Aristotle, and we'll see how it goes in terms of what we talk about, how much we kind of weave in and out of those two thinkers and the plethora of other names that inevitably show up in our discussion as well. But for now, welcome back to everyone. Thank you for being here. This is episode 3. The other 2 will be pinned on screen right now. Watch those if you haven't. What we're trying to do here is to show Aristotle in a new and in a more youthful, exuberant light would be one of the goals we're trying to achieve, aside from just having a riveting dialogos with one another as young males on an anagogic upward ascent. We're also wanting to showcase Aristotle in a renewed light, in a more vivified light, where he does have insights, he does have many things going for him that can be transformative and immediately applicable and implementable were we wanting to live a virtuous and flourishing life, which we all do, which is one of the core tenets of philosophy. And we're all philosophers. That's why we're here. That's why we're queer. So welcome back, Alex. It's a pleasure to have you here, my friend. I can think of very few people on this planet I'd rather have here for this journey over you. So how's it going?
Happy Pride. Happy Pride. We're all here, we're all queer.
When pride was a sin.
Yeah, welcome back to Philosophy as Physiology, where we strip Aristotle down to his bare ass and analyze him cell by cell. Yeah, Philosophy as Physiology, part 3. Yeah, you put it super well. You really capture the essence of what we're doing here. Where does essence as a term come from? What am I even saying when I say that? This episode, we're getting meta, not just meta to the layer of metaphysics, but even beyond that. We are looking at Plato's forms. We're looking at Aristotle's treatment of Plato's forms. We're going to course a path looking at the history of interpretation, how it's landed, and how Plato's central ideas have really informed and given some of the ground for Western philosophy as a whole. But specifically, we can look at Heidegger. We can look at the philosophy of John Rusin, a modern a contemporary philosopher doing continental philosophy, John Vervaeke in the mix. I'm looking forward to this conversation, and yeah, this is just such a joy to be doing it with you, Luca. There's very few things I enjoy doing more than this.
That sentiment is shared, my friend. Truth be told, I am, for as far as host standards go, I'm rather underprepared in terms of taking the charge on this conversation. So I'll let you take over in terms of the reins and deciding what we get into first and what whets our audience's appetites first. So any thoughts on where to begin?
Yeah, just a comment on that. And even in like third wave Platonism, which is a more modern way to understand and analyze Plato, they really treat the structure of the dialogues as important. The form in which philosophy is done is actually very central to the philosophy itself. You can't strip Plato's writings from the page and analyze them just as arguments, because you have to appreciate that he wrote them in dialogues. There were characters that were talking, some historical, some fictional. And so you have to appreciate that the flow of a conversation is much different to a treatise on a page. And in the same way, just in our conversation and listening back to them, I really appreciate how we can just actually surface one of these deep topics that is being talked about, and then us have that exchange and have that back and forth on it, rather than going super specific into the fine details of the text. So just to say that we are going to be discussing things informed by the general sentiment of what's there in books 8 through 10 in book Alpha, Alpha in the metaphysics, but we are going to give ourselves room to branch out, to explore different areas, and to follow the through line that comes up in this conversation ultimately, as Plato demonstrated. So I can give us a bit of a recap. Firstly, though, metaphysics, my translation arrived. It's by John McMahon, and I purposely got a different translation to yours, the Penguin Classics version, so that we would get different perspectives, we would get different aspects of the text, and then dialogically kind of weave them together. So that this translation arrives, and I then look it up and want to understand what it is able to contribute. So I'm asking, like, type in a Google search, what are the strengths of John McMahon's translation of the metaphysics? And I got back this answer: John McMahon's 19th century translations of Aristotle are generally considered outdated by modern scholarly standards, and reflect a Victorian religious perspective. They're typically available as inexpensive reprints, which makes them accessible, but their primary strength is often their, get this, low cost and public domain status, rather than contemporary philosophical accuracy. So I've actually got a translation that's acting as a phone a friend, as if the friend was old and religiously biased. So if you have any religious sentiments coming through in what I'm saying, I can point the blame somewhere else,
or point the credit somewhere else.
Indeed. Cool.
Yeah, that's excellent. So, I think much of we've spoken about how philosophy is foremost physiology, or a form of it is that. And I think I'm very much here for the dance as well, for the cosmic dance and the interplay and the fusion of interpretation, of rigorous analysis, of critique. But we know that what is most vital and what is alive, especially in the domain of philosophy, is necessarily polymorphic. And we're going to do our best to honor and engage in the iridescent nature of knowledge. So just saying back to you what you're saying, couldn't agree more.
Lovely. Yeah, so thinking back to our last episode, just for a bit of a recount and again synthesis, taking a step back to take a step forward, really. We looked at the philosopher last time. We questioned what it means to be a philosopher, what is their role, what is required in being a philosopher. As we saw in the figure of Socrates, but Plato and Aristotle as well. And we really were starting to uncover this idea of the role of a philosopher is there's kind of a prerequisite to know thyself, to have undergone an embodied transformation towards wisdom. And yeah, it's foundational in philosophy that there's this complex attitude that Socrates has towards wisdom. We did come up with a one step forwards, one inverted step back kind of metaphor, but so as that it's deepening, I want to say deepening the contradiction of self-identity, but also having that stance of Socratic irony to your quest and what you're doing, almost that finite transcendence. And we also touched on how that's partially surfacing in modern times through metamodernism. There's definitely some similarities in the way that truth and sincerity is given, where it's given in a way which also delivers it through a kind of irony. Getting into the metaphysics in book Alpha, it was really talking about what is wisdom, what is philosophy, and how has this looked historically, and then in society, how that shows up in different roles, and how there's different levels of craft and techne applied, whether there's some people that have just learned from experience and go from there, but some that seem to break through into almost the inner workings and the inner architecture of the forms and causes of life, such that they can be designers and design from first principles. And we also touched on this theme of Aristotle really wanting to preserve, to care for, and to be in right relation to the aspect of humans that makes us unique and stand out within the animal kingdom. So our capacity for the logos is something that Aristotle really wants to uphold in his definition of wisdom and is central to his philosophy. And that is something that is almost his historical ultimacy that he's getting to in that. We also touched on how Aristotle did a bad job of representing the philosophers before him, from Heraclitus and Parmenides through to Pythagoras. He doesn't quite grasp them in their entirety, and I feel like it's because he's reducing them just to his frame and seeing them as, okay, this guy found the material cause, this guy found the efficient cause, but they didn't have a coherent philosophy around that. It was a lucky punch. So he's almost sublating them to their system, but holds the bias of thinking that his system is superlative. And then we came to, and I found this to be a really fruitful part of the end of the dialogue, to locate and identify what we felt was lacking in Aristotle. And sort of seemed to be that Aristotle was insufficient in showing the orders of society around wisdom, like the almost symbolic order in society. And he kind of didn't have or couldn't philosophize with the Christian notion of agape. So the essence of what Aristotle's understanding of wisdom lacks was the pathic and the empathic, the empathetic. He stays in a more dry frame, and the core of love that's inscribed on our heart, that's brought to us through evolution and human consciousness as incarnated in the figure of Christ. His philosophy doesn't seem to hold that. And we almost talked about how the ascent up towards wisdom was perhaps done in a mental way, but then to come back down and attune to reality was done from the heart. And we actually developed our conception of wisdom to be the ratio religio, the right relation and attunement to how much love and where to show that love out to everyone else was wisdom, because you can't come back and be full-hearted and try and teach and show, coming back into the cave and not give people time to have their eyes adjusted, or to not be empathetic enough to meet people where they're at and still show up as a light of love for them, because you have that insight of love. And as a final thought on that, I sort of think no wonder that Aristotle really got the scientific method up and running. He was someone that reduced some of these important aspects of human experience to a more propositional layer and stripped back some of the important context and embedded emotional landscape that we live within, which is also some of the power of science, to be able to restrict and isolate and subdue subjectivity in our observation so that we can do it repeatedly and consistently. But then you're taking out the messiness of humans at the expense of taking out humans. It's very much the baby's out with the bathwater when you want to ontologize the realities that you find therein.
Yeah, on that last point, I think we see that most showcased with Aristotle's fixation on the importance of replicability as a skill and being in the importance of being a teacher. Only those that can abstract, again, in typical philosopher fashion, he's very much, to his credit and discredit, a philosopher of his time. In typical philosopher fashion, he says earlier in the Alpha book that, I'm paraphrasing, but only those who can teach really know, as a shift or as a or as a rewording of those who can't do teach. So yeah, the paying credit and privileging this faculty of abstraction is very Aristotelian. You put it really well in terms of subduing matter around you such that it can be replicated and subjugated to our human will is like probably science's greatest skill and its greatest feature, and we're not really sure if the feature is in fact a skill or not, and what its outer boundary and limits are. But yeah, that's a very cogent summary. I think we spoke about many things, and I particularly enjoyed the last little riff we did about the limitations of Aristotle and how there is a serious dearth of the empathic. Something we spoke about was climbing what you could call is the world tree, and how with every subsequent or successive ascent, you kind of recategorize things. So what you're calling empathy or charity at a higher level, once you get to that level, it doesn't feel like charity, because there's such a metanoia that a true ascent is the same thing as saying transformation, right? We talked about the importance of transformative wisdom versus informative. Informative is closer to knowledge and raw computational data and facts, and transformative is exactly that. It's far exceeding informative, and it's something that relabels. It is ontogenetic, I said last time. It breeds, you breathe it in, and then you breed something new out. And there's a serious lack in Aristotle of honoring, you used the word mythopoetic last time. What's the thing? I wonder what he would say about terms like Maya and veil, in terms of what is holding everything together. What he would identify a knot, he would visualize a knot, and he would say that it's a knot, but he wouldn't, and he would say that it's important what the causes of the knot are. But I almost feel like the one cause that really matters, the mystique of the fact that the knot is the one he would ignore. And that being a serious, I guess just a sorry and unfortunate lack in his treatment. So I guess I treat Aristotle how ChatGPT or Google treats your translators version of Aristotle, in terms of, here are the biases, know that, understand that, know that there's so much value in it, but here are the outer limits. And I guess you just have to treat any thinker that way, as well as understand the context, understand the historicity in which they find themselves embedded, consciously, unconsciously, pre-consciously. And I also find it amusing, as well, as I was rewatching the last episode, about when he starts the metaphysics, Aristotle thinks he's starting from the start. And it's always really, really just hilarious to me how every philosopher talks about everything that's come before them as being absolute garbage and gibberish. And let's start from where it really matters. Heidegger does the same thing. We'll talk about him later. But metaphysics hitherto has been nonsense, like literal, like linguistic nonsense. We couldn't have possibly done metaphysics so far. And the starting point that the thinker chooses is so telling as to who the man is and who the context is and what the milieu is and what their strengths and limitations, and just not even that, predispositions are. So I find it interesting that Aristotle thinks that understanding the temperament of the philosopher that's philosophized to start, I just find that like quirksome, you know, because like that says as much about him as it does about the study that he's engaged in. So yeah, I really enjoyed last episode as well. I think these recaps are really important and great. And yeah, anything else to add?
Yeah, nothing else to add really to the recap. We could mine it for a long time.
We want to.
I'd said a lot on that too, so I'm really glad you spoke back to it with the same depth and really heard it all. And yeah, it freshens up where we left off, and what you were saying there, understanding and appreciating the context of the philosopher. That's something that we touched on in episode 1. So yeah, we're kind of building this through line as we go and deepening our the intelligibility that's coming forward. There's something that I want to kind of take hold of in what you just said, because to my mind, my apprehension of and my proleptic reason says that this will be important in this conversation, is the difference between Aristotle and Plato was the difference between informative wisdom and transformative wisdom. I think there's something true in that when we're thinking of these philosophers. And so I'd love to get into this, to start unpacking this difference, you know, culturally and as a means of sort of the history of philosophy. How do we have Plato right in the zeitgeist? Are we staying true to who Plato was and the Neoplatonist view of the world, or do we have this thing called the theory of forms, and we think we've got Plato when we have that, and we can write it on a page and we can recite the arguments and we can analyze them by critiques and arguments and discussions? Is that the way to know Plato? Is that the way to transformative wisdom, or is that still residing at the level of informative wisdom, in formation, in form? There's still so much depth to that. It's amazing. Informative wisdom is remarkable and miraculous. Transformative wisdom is the deeper layer. Transformative wisdom is when the physiology comes into philosophy. No, that's the moment where you're asked to change your life. You're urged to, by participation, find and feel something different in your relationship to these ideas, and then your relationship to ideas more broadly, and your relationship to people around. Like, it's at that very fundamental layer of our cognition and of our salience landscapes, how we see the world, that is that's the level that starts to get changed and updated.
Yeah, we use the analogy of the designer and the craftsman, parroting what Aristotle said last time, and how there's sort of some luxury afforded to the designer who's above all and sees all and is almost playing God here, right, in his omniscience. And that's how I view transformative wisdom as distinct from informative wisdom. It's transformative, and so it takes in everything and goes beyond and above. And I do feel a little bit of irk in belittling informative wisdom too, because it's almost like that's the field in which we are always in, and we have these little anomalous spurts of transformation that are so rare to come by, and a lot of their value is in their scarcity. But you can't have a transformative experience every hour of your life. That's like, that doesn't even make sense. So the value in transformation is that it's rare, it's beautiful for that reason, it's limited, it's, you only have a couple of, well, you only have a couple hundred tries in your whole life probably, or goes at it. And they're twin flames. I again envision the yin yang symbol where the entire field is one color. The tiny bit that really matters, if you will, is the other color and the higher one. So both necessary, but the transformative one is the one that you encounter at any crossroads with destiny, and the ones that will really be lodged and etched into your psyche and memory. So we tend to just want to give transformative experiences, and even the wording, you know, it's so high and mighty. It's transformative. It's not just coming into formation. I think with good reason, like we give it privilege with good reason. But yeah, just wanting to say that informative isn't nothing.
Definitely. And even in what you're saying, like that example of the designer as being transformative and having that ability to think from first principles and thereby not be contained to a specific experience or, you know, perception of the sensibles, but actually transcends that and can then act and philosophize and know reality from this standpoint that is cross domain. You know, even in physics is excellence and knowledge in one specific domain, but metaphysics means the excellence and knowledge across domains. It's even there in the very title of the book. So it's there in Aristotle, but it's demonstrated in Plato. I don't think Aristotle is able to demonstrate it. He's seeing it and putting it into words, but Plato is the one through the dialogues showing us how it unfolds and showing us where it takes you to this moment of aporia, and the aporetic moment is the very place where you can see the transformative wisdom starting to blossom and starting to take hold.
Which is funny given how much Aristotle uses the word demonstration as being of utmost importance in science as the demonstrative act. And he understands this idea of versatility very well, and how the meta skill is always exactly that. It's meta. It's being able to select mode of being, select mode of cognition. And in this situation, I want to be this. At that situation, this is my calling. He's able to, yeah, he's so like able to identify this objectively from a distance, but then when it comes to it, he's dry, you know, when it really matters, it almost feels. And I wonder if part of that is just because of, again, I like to bring up historic and logistic reasons, how much of his narrative work was just lost in the burning of Alexandria Library. You know, like he wrote narratives. It's not like he didn't. We just don't have access to them, but we can only speak with what we do have left.
And in that way, his philosophy is open-ended. It doesn't have a definitive close, not just because of his design, but because of his real circumstance of being in the world and being subject to different politics, him even being cast out of Athens, like what was lost there and how his reputation was damaged, and all of that is woven into what it is to do philosophy and get close to the real. But I think of also,
sorry, we brought up pre-trans fallacy as a concept last time. I almost feel like Plato is your entry point to philosophy. Often in intro to philosophy courses and books, you'll hear this recommended, right? Start with the dialogue, start with the great 5 dialogues, then move on to more, they say, quote unquote, rigorous stuff. And you do that, and then you think, my God, I think like where I started was where I need to end up. And then you go back to the dialogues and you think, nah, shit, this is it, man. What was I doing traipsing around with all that nonsense? Necessarily so, but like that's not my resting spot. You know, that's not where the rubber meets the road. That's just where I can like engage in combative dialectic, but not dialogos.
Yeah, and it's quite ironic that the first philosophy class I took at university was, introduction to philosophy and the history of mind and metaphysics. We started with Plato. We started with analyzing his argument for the forms, and we wrote an essay on the influences of Plato and whether his theory of forms has truth value. Nothing phenomenological about it, really. It was purely argumentative and conceptual. And I kind of left it thinking, oh yeah, like I kind of had higher expectations, and I'm pretty sure that Plato is better than that, but it's cool. And to now coming, yeah, again back to the dialogues, but having found the right, the teachers who can actually teach, and appreciate and love wisdom. And so now finding it, but it's, yeah, taken some of my own wayfinding to get there. I want to get into I want to get into some of the kind of more formal arguments that we're talking about here. And first, I just giving thanks and paying ode to some of the philosophers before, and even the ones that are around in contemporary times, of whom I have taken large influence from. Two Johns and a Matthew, so very biblical. John Vervaeke, John Rusin, and Matthew Segal. They've had, and just paying homage to acknowledge them and say, yeah, there's going to be a lot of ideas which have taken influence from them. And yeah, they're kind of some of our guides as we start in this. And even just starting with a quote from John Rusin: "There's no such thing as Plato's theory of the forms. It's silliness invented by commentators on Plato and perpetuated by people who repeat what they heard." There's a lot of discussion around Plato being that seminal figure and being someone that we start with. But as you've probably been able to pick up by the sentiment, there's a lot of people that view, take the form of the arguments out of the dialogues and evaluate them as such. And when we do that, we get these things like theory of the forms, and we get these dogmatic points of the forms definitively exist in a separate world, and the forms are unchanging, and there's a form for every entity and object. And some of that's there. Okay, you can like literally read some of the dialogues and take that and almost like assume that's what's been said. But again, it's being said in a dialogue where, even in some ways, I think this is in the Parmenides, Socrates is like kind of sheepish and ashamed and a little bit embarrassed about the account of the forms as given in the Republic. So there's this innate character to the dialogues where there's an ambivalence towards these kind of ideas, like how could you speak to ultimate reality and not acknowledge your challenges? And so I think all of that needs to be considered when reading Plato, and it's what we're doing here. And the company we're in is giving charity to that interpretation, saying that Plato wasn't a dogmatist, he also wasn't a skeptic. Is there a third way that we can approach and understand Plato? And yeah, the philosophers that we're taking inspiration from are essentially those in the third way, and this is a bit of just meaning, yeah, the general literary commentary that's come about in the last 30 years on Plato, which is bringing cognitive science to philosophy and being interdisciplinary and bringing phenomenology back into the theory of the forms, to turn it not into a theory but into a lived reality that we can all participate in.
all the way down to body and food, nutrition science, the way that cells organize and regenerate. We're starting to learn stuff that, like, not that Plato ever was dismantled, but we're starting to learn the centrality of the general streams of thought that would conceptualize the forms. Again, the forms are not one thing itself. They are, but they're not. Like, there are many straw man arguments you could use to dismantle this grand theory of the forms. Like, oh, well, okay, that accounts for the objects and the beings and the entities in the material universe. What about the values? You know, like, yeah, so it's not a complete account, it's not a complete depiction, but that's really straw manning, and you're not understanding the poesy in which some of those dialogues took place. That's all I'd say on that.
Yeah, cool. What would you say on the forms themselves? I know last time I asked about the first line of the metaphysics, all men by nature desire to know, and I got a great answer, and it went right to some of the core and the aliveness and the uncertainty. So what of the forms, Luca?
I view them predominantly as perhaps the most noble lie. It's a nice way to, I guess, captivate people and entrance them. And I think there's a beauty and an allure to them that stops there. And this is probably something that me and you come at this from opposing angles with. I start from a place of skepticism, high skepticism when it comes to the forms. I understand the sentiment of wanting to I understand the sentiment, however sickly I think it is, to capture essence, because I think at core that's what's happening. I think when we use the classic example of the glass, how do we distinguish this glass from another glass? Because, like, we can see that it's different, but surely there's something that persists between the two of them such that we can intelligibly recognize both as still being glasses. And if that is the case, which my phenomenology suggests that it is, then the abstract category that is above that is that there must be such a thing as glassness. And then when you scale this out fractally across all of being and across all of our lived experience, you start to think there has to be the idea of isness and suchness that is somehow a deeper, a truer, a more immaterial. Again, we conflate the two. We think that what's immaterial is deeper somehow, and it sickens me. But that there is some higher order, superordinate reality that is actually birthing this reality. And to me, this is a famous argument, but it seems to me to just be the trail that leads us towards Christianity. And a lot of the eternal forms being simply an underdeveloped version of the Christian argument of there being a kingdom of heaven where there are divine ideals that cannot be supplanted or reached, but they're there nonetheless, and they're what birthed this reality. And it's almost like we're living in a derived second order reality, and it's impure and corrupt. And this is later on where ideas, I think, such as impurity and the guilty conscience and sin come from. I think it's not an exact science, it's not an exact cause and effect, but I think a lot of that is the Plato's forms are the progenitor for a lot of that sentiment that plagues modern humanity's soul. And it's interesting that, Aristotle runs away from Plato's idea of the form. He sticks to the idea of form, but it's to be found in the material object itself. It's in form, right? It's the structural, functional organization of the piece of matter that you're looking at. It's you could even say like a contact epistemology, where you experience form only when you experience the thing, and there's a more tethered, coupled relationship between the experiencer and the experienced, and only then does the form activate, as opposed to the precise opposite. I get the sense with Plato, where it's almost like when you're not looking, the form is acting upon you. But with Aristotle, it's you're looking, you're being, you're touching, you're sensing, you're feeling, and so you can experience the form, which I think is a far more grounded, if we're going to go with this idea of a higher higher reality that is responsible for what we experience. I like Aristotle's answer to the forms a lot more than Plato's. I have a few more thoughts on this, but they're kind of tangential, so I'll get you to riff on that first.
Awesome. Yeah, we may slightly disagree on this point, so it'll be it'll be great and very person to person to circle around that and to uncover it and elucidate it. I hear you, and I agree with most of what you're saying. That rather than pointing to the forms or the intelligible realities of things as drawing away and off into a space somewhere else that Plato has to sort of rationalize or, be an idealist and say that they exist in, in a more mental place that's harder to fully grasp and see it, but we can just see the representations of it. There's a higher world with forms and truths, and we are just down in this world of the shadows. That does perpetuate the two worlds mythology, and that does run a massive course. And maybe he was the progenitor of that kind of thinking, but I mean, also looking at a Jungian lens, that kind of thinking is probably something that spontaneously arises in the unconscious and that we are always doomed to contend with in a way. I also feel that Aristotle does make a really interesting turn of, instead of seeing the forms as transcendent, seeing them as immanent. They are existing entirely and dependent entirely on the very material substance that they are a part of. And he can do really interesting things with that and really helpful things. He can explain change a lot better. He can understand different classes of objects. He can have that notion of potential and actual all woven in, and he can see the soul of objects there in the thing rather than having to say that it points to a place beyond itself. But I would say that Plato has the contact epistemology and Aristotle has the contacted epistemology. And I'm probably not going to qualify that because it's probably wrong, but there's again something there which I can talk to. Anything to say on that, and then I will get into some thoughts and musings around the forms myself.
Yeah, I love that we're approaching this from the opposite ends of the spectrum, and it's interesting to me that you said that in Plato's conceptualization of the forms, it's immanent towards between matter and unmatter, or the immaterial, whereas I see it as being a very causal relationship. I don't see sensible things causing insensible things the same way the opposite is true. So maybe I just didn't view it as such so far, but yeah, no, that's interesting that you view it as being in very much a healthy tension relationship between matter as we experience it and matter as we don't experience it. You see some sort of a pull and a push between the two of them that's magnetic. I didn't view it like that. I viewed it as very much top down or bottom up, but not both.
Yeah.
There is the correspondence issue that I previously belittled as a straw man thing, but what, where does it end kind of thing with the forms? So I'm looking at a beautiful girl. She's beautiful because she's engaging in the form of beauty. And that's why it's comprehensible to me as such. Were she more beautiful, she'd be engaging even more and truer in the concept of beauty. Like, come on now. What are we talking about? There's that.
I agree. I agree. That's why I
Doesn't it
think
make more sense that there is something very much I can not point to, because I can't point to things that are traits or innate, but something that is locatable, something that is identifiable in her that makes her beautiful, that we can later on, after we can scale, after we recognize that little tidbit, we can finally spread that out and permeate it, as opposed to something is being proliferated down to us. I think it's a purely temperamental thing. I feel uneasy about that, and it's because of my personality. I feel a loss of control that I don't enjoy. But I couldn't actually give you a more substantive argument than that.
No, I think the arguments that you're making are also very legitimate, and I, see the motives and what you want to do. To me, and to my understanding of Plato and the forms, I feel in some ways you're a little bit at risk of also, to some level, seeing this as arguments. And I would maybe say lean into the phenomenology a little bit more as just a way of where we meet in this.
Yeah.
I think it's less of beauty coming down from somewhere and the more beautiful girl having, in some ways a closer proximity like to that ideal. I would, in that example, kind of observe the fact that we can say that between them that they are both beautiful, and there's varying degrees of that, but maybe each of their potential to reach a level of beauty is perceptibly different, but that there is a normative standard, that there is a sort of transcendent apprehension of beauty, that we can acknowledge that it's kind of, I'm getting caught up in the example a little bit, that I mean beautiful things participate in. It's the case that beauty has existed for large swaths of time, and it's, if we look at this under the microscope, if we take a zoomed in approach, or we even zoom out, that beauty just fades and isn't longer there any longer there in the, like, it's just because we're seeing it at this level that the beauty is really there. So it's not just our senses and what we're seeing that we are experiencing beauty. It's also something that exists in a mental way that we are seeing a sort of correspondence to. But I also don't want to take this towards that correspondence view, because Heidegger is very critical of it, and I think rightly so. So I wouldn't go to say it corresponds to a form of beauty that we hold and then get this sort of representationalism. I would go somewhere different with it.
Yeah, I think you're speaking more about the contingent aspect of it rather than the correspondent aspect of it. And yeah, that's very right. And, were I to move 2 meters closer to her, the way that I cut up the world, the way that I see her would be entirely different. Standards of beauty, almost like at a micro level, just change instantaneously. It's the typical idea. I mean, I guess it comes from Aristotle originally, of form as eidos. You move too close, you lose the gestalt. You move too far, you lose the detail. And how much of beauty is sitting at a very precarious tightrope walker-esque middle golden mean there. And the danger you run with Aristotle's idea of form is that when you say that form is in the particulars, you are subject to being a subject, like subject to mendacious deception and distrust, like very justified distrust of the senses. At any one given time, you're not going to be equidistant from gestalt and detail in an objective sense. So like, you're almost always experiencing beauty imperfectly regardless of whether you want to or not. So now I'm almost changing my mind as I say that. Like, there's no possible
And
way. Yeah.
let's move from beauty as well. Let's go to something, kind of quite generalizable, and this is actually an example that Plato gives when he's talking about it: a spinning top. You have a spinning top, it's made of wood, it's got some kind of etchings and patterns. The sensible particulars of it, when you spin it, it changes. It's then got this spherical nature, just by its fast spinning, you can kind of see the form of a circle start to materialize. But it's got a central axis. It has like a straightness along where it's spinning, and it might be wobbling slightly. But if often when you first spin it and you do it right, you're then getting, okay, in this spinning top, I'm now seeing the circularity of it and the straightness. But these properties that we see, and you could easily say, yeah, it's circular or it's straight, are very, like, in what way are they there in the spinning top? It is resembling, it has a likeness to this kind of form, but it in itself doesn't possess those things that we ascribe to it. It doesn't have the things that we see in it. And so the object itself is pointing to something that's beyond itself. So looking at it in this way, the spinning top is, and how we perceive it, is defined by a reality that exceeds it. It has the circularity and it has the straightness. That is what we're seeing in it. But it itself doesn't exactly possess those qualities. It's defined by something that it by itself is inadequate to present, in the words of John Rusin. And you can think of more examples more broadly too. In mathematics, 1 + 1 is 2 is, we're absolutely certain of it. We know it's true. Where is the perfect one that we have seen before in nature? It's only through kind of this pure mathematics that we can deal at that level of abstraction. You could say, here's one object, here's another, and together there's two, and functionally they work. But in what way are these objects one? Like, we are very much seeing an identity or interacting with it, or the reality is presenting itself to us in a way that we see ones, and then we can do like addition and multiplication with it. But that is not imminently there in the particulars. When you look at the particulars, you just see a vastness, a manyness, a combinatorially explosive array of sense data. And it's only through this conformity of our nous, in a sense, our intellect, that we are able to do such things as 1 + 1 = 2. There's also, like, I was as I was kind of reading this, I was looking outside, and there were tuis that were flying by in the tree, and did a little exercise myself of in contemplation. Like, when I see tuis land in the tree and singing, jumping between branches, we can easily recognize it as a bird. It has a set of characteristics that make it identifiable. It's covered in feathers. It's got these white wattles, a kind of, covered in feathers. It flies. Unique set of behaviors. Entire life, it goes through stages of development. So I might see a baby tui versus a grown tui. Every time I see one, I can point it out, and I can point to it and know it's a tui, absolutely. But each tui I see is never the same, and it's almost in a way, functionally for me to interact with it, doesn't matter that it's never the same. But there's many instances where that does matter. What if there's a tui and it's got a broken wing and it's in danger, and I am then looking to help it, or help a chick that's fallen out of a nest? Then I see a tui and really notice its differences. So aside that, it's just a kind of habit and convenient way for us to categorize it and put it into that left hemispheric understanding. But the tuis themselves are not the same, and so I'm giving and meeting a reality of the tui. I can recognize a structure that is real, and that's the very meaning of what I'm seeing is a tui, even though in reality it never measures up to like tui itself. So through these examples, I want to say that there is an imminent beyondness that objects and concepts and sensible particulars have, where they are not as such the thing in themselves, but ultimately the thing beyond themselves in their very existence. And I think this just gives you that phenomenological a way to approach how the forms might look and might show up, and gives you some of the almost theoretical ways in which we can make sense of what Plato is talking about in the forms. And for me, I'll just say as well, this also is still a little bit in that dry and propositional level. I think there's another layer to the forms, the transformative nature of the forms, but this is in the constellation, a little bit of like that tangential aside, which we can get to next. But I'd be curious to hear from you how that landed.
So much in that, man. Bravo, first of all. The way you weave together all these different nodes and form some sort of a coherent web at the end of it is really impressive. I knew I hired the right guy. No, that spinning top example is really elegant, man. I think, are you thinking of the Inception spinning top? Because that's what was coming to mind. That's what you mean, right?
I definitely think of it. I don't know how Platonic that scene in the movie was. It's an example that Plato gives in his dialogue, but yeah, that's.
But it's that object, right? Like I'm not thinking of the
Yes.
wrong thing. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the word beyondness really stood out to me in what you said, and how the beyondness isn't actually beyond. And that's the fucking annoying paradox, is the beyondness is so deeply within that it almost hurts to label it beyondness. It's so within, And I guess I view some of what you're saying, the way it lands is, I would counter it from what warms me up to what you're saying is to think about it, really try to think about it phenomenologically and forget the rhetorical and the combative, forget the argumentative. So when you actually when you gave the example of the tuis, I was right there with you. I was watching those tuis with you, and it gave me something I wanted to say actually is, personally, I believe that things are birthed from their opposites, like at a metaphysical level. And the example that really landed for me when I came across it was in The Gay Science. Nietzsche talks about the birth of logic out of illogic. And it really struck me. It just came to mind when you were talking about the tuis and how you don't need to differentiate. Like there's no evolutionary advantage in differentiating from one tui to another in terms of continuing and persisting your existence. Your self-preservation as a will or an ego doesn't depend on distinguishing from one tui to another. But what if that example was apples and it was 5,000 years ago and you required nutriment as you were foraging, Things don't hang in nature meaningfully until we impose some sort of form on them. And there's a huge evolutionary benefit in terms of, like, if you want to continue to live, you better assume identicality and impose identicality on things where there are none. And so I almost feel that way with the forms, where logic is just this thing that's superimposed, necessarily so, but ultimately a load-bearing fiction, not the ground of reality. I feel that way with forms as well. I could like literally carbon copy that same example. But the other thing I wanted to say is just to again privilege the cognizing subject. Like, you know, you ask the question, is there a straightness, is it on an angle, is the axis what's most real about the spinning top? Like, what's the actual core of it? What's the thing that is most it and beyond it? And I just instinctively withdraw from that as a sentiment personally. Like, I feel that it's a decrepit instinct to want to understand the reality that exceeds your perception. Like, your perception, your perspectival experience is so laden with magic and gold that you'd have to be jumping 20 steps to worry about that kind of thing. It's not really an answer to what you're saying. It's just a more psychological position, you know, like, what is the kind of wandering, meandering soul that wonders about the thing that isn't immediately right in front of him? And why is that considered the noble task? So I guess that opens up some other doors and rifts we can get into. But and this is very modern too. Like, this is more about paying heed to epistemics more than anything. But yeah, my I just, in terms of my relevance realization, my core concern wouldn't even be the thing beyond the thing that's actually within the thing. It's just the thing that I'm experiencing. And it need not be the same as what you're experiencing. And difference is okay. And difference is not only okay, it's primary. And identity is secondary, right? As Deleuze would say, and difference and repetition. But yeah, and anything to say on that? Because that would have opened up a few doors.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the impulse to follow the through line of something is the very beauty of it that's in front of us. It's not to see into a different plane and obfuscate or undermine the reality of what's then and there, but it's to see the being as it comes down and is incarnated in the beings. Like, this is to trace out through the eidos of something, to find the one.
Yes,
The
it actually
oneness.
it dignifies the here and now, right? If we can go through and above and beyond, I understand that. I see that fully as well. It's not a denigration. It's not a obfuscation of the sensible experience. It's actually enriching it if you can understand it. And every time you come back down to the senses after having an experience with beyondness, it's always better for it. You know, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think the thing that the impulse I'm pointing to as being sick is the will to exactitude. This thing that everything needs to fit somewhere somehow, and it's very unartistic and like unaesthetic. I value aesthetics a lot and view a lot of reality as an aesthetic experience and phenomenon. And so just at a very personal level, when something is unartistic, I'm kind of turned off from it. It's like, it's such a cheesy self-help saying, but like, the perfection is in the imperfection, man. Like, I know you're not saying that we need to perfect the imperfect. You're saying we need to enrich it such that it can be our imperfect in a sense, or like a higher imperfect. But that's just kind of where my mind goes as well.
Yeah. And I mean, I sort of, okay, yeah, here's another thing. The and speaking of perception, like, I was having a conversation, and it was even like over messages that I reached this, which was great that we reached this. And there was a comment made about the way something was said came across very perfectly, even though perfection doesn't exist. And it just made me reflect on the adverbial or verbial nature of a term like perfection, how it's something done in the doing. It's not seen or grasped in a certain state, and almost like applying that as, okay, you can kind of reach perfection as an activity but not as a state. When we look at the forms and what we're talking about here.
Sorry, you disappeared for a second, Alex. Can you say that?
Yeah.
So the adverbial and verbial, and how the perfection isn't in like the post hoc, something like that.
Yeah, perfection can be attained in the doing of something, but it cannot be attained as a certain state that is, has kind of borders in it and as a state of perfection. And I want to apply that to what we're doing here and say that we're not actually thinking about objects and forms as things, we're thinking about them as relations. And what we're doing when we are entering into this eidetic adduction, when we are seduced by the forms and wanting to come to know them, we're deepening our relation to what's here and also seeing the ways that they are by their very essence connected through their own unique through line to something which has a more universal and enduring quality, and that the innate beauty of the things is not like purely emanating from that, but does have that bidirectional relationship up to like those ideals of beauty. Like the way up and the way down is the same way, is what I'm getting to. And what I'm also getting to is that we find that only but through participating in relationally with our field of experience and with the people and with our contemplation of the objects themselves.
Yeah, beautifully put. And the participatory relation is perhaps bottommost, if not the perspectival, in what in knowing something. And that's what we're trying to do when we engage in forms and representation in general. We're represented and representational beings. We can't help but picture. And it's almost like the best, most accurate, the thing with highest veracity is the one that you can't depict. And yeah, like the way up and the way down is very much the same when it comes to accruing wisdom in general.
And I feel like it's because of this participatory nature of the forms, and this is the deeper layer that what I had mentioned before was kind of lacking. It is the deep participation with the forms and things I can speak to in first-hand experience of it, which makes me see the credit to this and not like believe that this is the way things are, but makes me very open to this as being like one of the real aspects of reality, because you can have that very direct, imminent participation with the forms on that level. But because we are embodied in this way, because we are doing philosophy as physiology with sensible particulars, it requires not only a leap of reason, but a leap of faith. And this comes from John Vervaeke's philosophy around Neoplatonism, and what he's recovering there is that it's not only dialogical and rational, it's also asking of your being to put yourself in a perspectival position that makes you open to the depths of your participation in that. It requires something that isn't immediately certain to you to have the transformation that's there.
Yeah, a lot of faith rests on assumed open-endedness, and when you take the leap of faith, what you're really doing is simply just engaging in the world. You're not being unhomely. You're acting despite Heidegger's definition of anxiety, right? You're actually, yeah, the word in spite. You're acting despite. It's not like everything's rosy dozy. It's about this, but still, and that's what foremost the leap of faith is. And like so much of what's missing in Aristotle and the love and the beauty we spoke about and how it feels dry, that's another thing that's missing in Aristotle, is he would dare not take the leap of faith, whereas Plato might. And he would say something kind of just entertaining the muse off an impulse, and it's like, yeah, well, it's an impulse, so it's real, so I'll say it in my dialogue, through Socrates. whereas Aristotle would almost like rigidly be like, does it stand this? Does it stand that? And then once it passes the litmus test, then he would put it in a text or in his lecture notes. So something I've been thinking about just personally is this leap of faith idea, and how our most fortuitous and propitious moments, speaking existentially as an agent in the arena, in the world, rest entirely on making the correct leaps of faith, because there is such a thing as bad risk taking. Like we're not talking about just go for it. Like this isn't an unbridled invitation to risk max, we're talking about yeah, I guess something that has a higher symbolic order and a more procreative force in the individual. So very the leap of faith in a very Kierkegaardian sense.
Yeah, and Kierkegaard, Socrates was his great teacher, and he also wrote in dialogues, and he did his first, I don't know if this is right, dissertation on like Socratic irony. Like one of the early things he wrote was on that. So it's fitting that the leap of faith comes into this as well. Yeah, just to mine this understanding of participation a little bit more. Like I would say that Plato isn't giving us a set of propositions. He's showing us to the deep relational ground of being. And even you could say like there's something important there in the criticism that Heidegger has of Plato, which is very cool. But people like Drew Hyland, Finitude and Transcendence in the Platonic Dialogues would actually, giving the phenomenological reading of Plato again, find Heidegger and some of Heidegger's like most formidable concepts within the dialogues. For example, the moment of aporia, where you have that deep encounter with the relationality of the virtues, say, that is a moment of aletheia. That is a revealing or unconcealment of truth. It's not something that connects accurately with a concept we have in our mind and a concept that we have in the outer world. It is very much one present conformity of our minds to reality and receiving that in a relational way that is also like relational, also meaning perceiving as a relationship. And this is going to more phenomenology from Merleau-Ponty, that the more time that we spend merely just like looking at something and noticing its qualities, the moreness do we receive that if we actually give the relationship some time and attention, it gives back to us in a much deeper way than if we were otherwise only briefly attending to it. So the way that even our very own sense of perceptions, which we think to be unchanging and quite static, given time and attention, actually opens us up to so much more of what's there. And what I want to say is, can potentially open us up to the so much moreness of things, which is their through line, which is not just an aspect that we can perceive. It actually then invokes in ourselves our own relational response to what we're seeing, and through that, kind of coming online of nous, are we able to see further and have disclosed the reality of something to us. And I think from me personally, it has been in conversations that has happened most reliably and most profoundly. It's been talking with friends, and I remember them very vividly too. One time I was at university and we had just gone to Albert Park, which is a really nice, colourful garden, and I was just sitting there on the bench, and for about 45 minutes having this talk with my friend, and it was just absolutely splendid, and it felt like being in the garden was the perfect place for it. And just the depth of intelligibility that we got to, like I was talking a bit about, philosophy and Plato, and kind of playing the role of a midwife, where he was a very smart guy, but hadn't read, Plato and philosophy all that much, and so I could take him, and we're essentially circling around virtue, and you get to a place where, similar to how I'm feeling now, where there's this back and forth. There's a deep receptivity and flow that you achieve, and it does. Yeah, it is like you're seeing the world in a more intelligible way. You're still very present and very grounded, and I feel like this is where that transformation can start to take place.
It's interesting you use the word aletheia and you use so many anecdotes alongside in the same riff. That's perfect. It's Aristotle talks so much about final cause. Purpose is already there in the thing. All modes of being are present and alive simultaneously. All that the efficient cause, all that the person acting, attending does is aliven the modes of occasioning that are already there. And when you speak about aletheia and truth as a revealing, it's exactly that, the way Heidegger talks about unconcealment, something that was already there being unearthed by your perception of it, but not in like a relativistic way. It's birthed by your knowledge of it. Techne, we use that word a lot. Techne is a mode of aletheia. It comes under revealing, like when again, the contact epistemology, when you are not just attending but engaging with something, it's becoming real, and it's co-created and it's co-created, both of you. There's a reciprocity there, and if you have a receptivity, it's also co-constitutive to your actual being. Like it's in you, you're in it, and you're like in the abstract space hanging between you two as well. It's not some first matter that's there and then the artist impresses form upon it. The form is like, I also don't think time is linear, which is quite funny. So like, I also think you've already done it and now you're just kind of redoing it, kind of thing. So all of that's just kind of scattered thoughts about techne and aletheia, and Heidegger is perfect for this kind of thing, I think there's an inherent dynamism he's always trying to point us to in all his, I've only read his essays, and he keeps pointing to this like thing of, it's not the Heraclitean flux, it's like there's a swath under reality that's just waiting to break away from you. And like everything is kind of held together so precariously, so tentatively, and he preciously treats the preciousness of life. He's very optimistic about existence in a sense. He just sounds really dour and academic and dry, but there's such a faint hope and possibility in his writings that I really love, and really are a good response to, not even response, a continuation of Aristotle. He loves him. He talks about him a lot, the way Kierkegaard does with Socrates. So as a student of Aristotle, very explicitly, I think Heidegger does a great job carrying the baton forward and actually doing what me and you are attempting to do right now, and breathe life into what is, at first glance, simply dry text.
This is getting spiritual. I love what you're saying, and just a few kind of quotes that stand out. Yeah, how it's alivening the modes of relation that are already there. Yes, and also like Heidegger is wanting to preciously treat the preciousness of life. Like, that's so precious.
Phrase.
Yeah, they were just they were wicked.
But
And
you
yeah,
use the word midwife. Can you midwife something into being? You know, like the basis of metaphysics is what do we know of change? How do things come into being? How do things go out of being? How can I be the midwife such that something experiences poesis, physis, you know? And isn't that like the existentialist project? Like, how many modes of occasioning can you enliven in your life?
oh, and Alfred North Whitehead is just here as well, like, and waiting for us, waiting for us to get here and say, yeah, and also how many forms can you ingress in all of those actual occasions? And I think Alfred North Whitehead takes Aristotle into Plato and integrates them a lot more. And what do you get? You don't have a substance ontology, you have a process ontology, which I would say is more relational in its nature. So he's someone else that we can use to think with and look for the integrations here. But I think kind of feeling the resonance with Heidegger, I think there's a bit more to go in.
Hmm.
A little bit around, yeah, and what you were saying before, again, the Meister Eckhart quote came up to me. The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me. My eye and God's eye are one eye, one seeing, one knowing, one love. Like
Wow.
that's what you're talking to, but just that perceiving of and into the beyondness is also at the same time being perceived by the beyondness that comes back and informs and inflows your physiology.
You have brought up John Vervaeke a few times. What I know of his idea of distributed cognition, from wherever he gets that from, I was thinking of something from Plato's Symposium. I'll just read out the quote. So, I mean, before that, though, what's the generic line? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. You know, eyes of the lover make of the beloved an Aphrodite. If you don't believe in yourself, believe in my belief of you, at least. This is like talking about the co-creative aspect of reality with wherever your attention fixes its gaze. The eyes of the lover make of the beloved an Aphrodite. It's made this, what I was saying about distributed cognition, is so much of you is outside of you in terms of perception and awareness that your essence, like, I guess this is more Platonic than Aristotelian, and I'm doing a full circle on my own argument, but so little of your core is actually inside of you. Essence is to be found in the distributed network somehow that rests in the hyperspace we call loosely or colloquially the interpersonal. And this is true at the level of psychic reality and identity. What am I if not just a fragment gets born into life when the 5 people I most love see me as such? So yeah, just some thoughts there as well.
Beauty's not in the eye of the beholder. Beauty's in the eye that is between the beholder and the thing that the eye beholds. Yeah, love what you're saying. And yeah, there was something that came up, which is just a quote from the Republic, and it's from Plato. It's when he's talking about the beauty, and when he's talking about beauty and the good, he kind of recognizes the duality that they have, good and evil, or beauty and ugly, just and unjust. He says each is itself one, but by showing up everywhere in a community with actions, bodies, and one another, each appears many. So in this way, where the very forms that they take in the world around us and the multitudes that we see in it are there, but yeah, when they're traced through, you can kind of discernibly find the commonalities between them. And it's interesting that that was, I mean, a little bit of an aside, but what you're saying around, even when you introspect, you also are drawn beyond yourself in a way. You're drawn beyond yourself into this distributed cognitive web, like which has in itself a one and a many, because there's one cognition that's a part of it, but then you're even seeing that fractal pattern of, okay, but it's also comprised of the thinking of many different people, and we have this cognitive capacity for that to link up and draw on one another and to lead us to be more rational. So
and just quickly invoke Jung again for a second.
That's where I was going. Sorry. The collective unconscious as well as this reservoir for that collective experience, but that speaks to us in one single way, like through an image or through a dream or through one single symbol that can be a condensed light of the manyness of many people over many times, over many circumstances, can just conform into one. And that's like that's like your own psychology. That's something that's beyond you, that's deeper than you, right? Going back into you through your memory and through the unconscious. You don't always have immediate access to that, but it's there. And it's there how? By making yourself receptive enough to see that. So again, that relationship to things is like, perception is not perceiver perceives the thing. Perception is more like relationships to things that we have. And even with your own internal perception, there's also a relationship there that deepens when you give it time, and when you do things like journal your dreams or meditate or reflect on your inner life. It happens the same way for ourselves as beings that are beyond ourselves.
And the beyondness is to be found beyond ourselves as well as within ourselves, which just makes it a stupidly complex quadrant that we're now talking about. But exactly that on Jung, man. Like, I think nothing informs, true to the wording we've been using, the individual unconscious more than the collective unconscious. Post distillation, the many cement as the one and come into our individual conscious, and that's the ground of introspection. Yeah. And I think one thing we can talk about as well with the Heidegger loop open is, where do you think nothingness, as he portrays it, fits into this at all? Nothingness as being, I guess in a post-Hegelian sense, he would say nothingness as being deeper than or bottommost, even more than negation. Like, what do you make of that?
Yeah. I've got maybe something for it. Philosophia is the love of wisdom. It is not the attainment of wisdom. I don't know if I'm exactly representing Heidegger in the way that he uses that concept of nothingness, but one of the ways where you can bring it in is through the finitude of the dialogues. Almost in that sense of lacking, like we're drawn to and seduced by wisdom, but you can only ever have that relationship of love to it because it's always eluding you, and it's not just so easy to have it and ascertain it and kind of have that sense of fulfillment. I think there is a very filling and overflowing sense to intelligibility and the promise of the good that's made, that your intelligibility, that your thoughts of the world will always accurately conform to reality itself, as a property of the nous and not just your own experience, because people can be kind of tricked by realities that they're perceiving. But I wonder if some of that kind of innate not quiteness or not or knowing what something is until we turn to it and actually realize that it's much other than what we had thought. I wonder if there's a way in which we can address like our own limitation and ontological lack that is inherent in nature and is maybe there in what Heidegger's nothingness is about.
Wow, compelling stuff, man. What was really sparked for me is the eternal promise. We were speaking semi-theologically before about the leap of faith, and the good, one working definition of that is that your intelligibility of reality is wedded to reality itself as such. And this is the eternal promise of God and the good. It's like, yeah, like there is some sort of comprehensible correspondence between your understanding, your perception, and the understood and the perceived, the eternal promise of being. And the leap of faith isn't even like a moment in time where you take a leap of faith. It's the perennial move. It's like there's nothing else you can do but keep leaping and like be mid-leap at any one given stage. Yeah, I'm not sure if I have anything to add on the nothingness stuff aside from like we immediately kind of box nothingness into like the negation of being, or like the negation of the totality of being, and then that becomes its own category, and we fall into the same age-old paradoxes that so much of systems building philosophy does. And we have no way of talking about non-being, and I almost feel relieved that we don't, because I'm not sure why, but I feel like if there's something that's existentially dread-worthy, it would be non-being and the experience of it, which we thankfully can't anyway. So that would be the void, not the negation of being. And that's all.
And I think like Heidegger's negation of being in nothingness is less to do with the void and more to do with how the void is like found and interwoven into everything therein. And
Yes.
So for Heidegger, like nothingness is not a thing, right? It's not like that thing of nothingness, but it is like an action of disclosure. And I think it's the fact of our inability to ascertain wisdom and always and only have a relationship of love to it is like that lack and distance between us and the thing that we are striving for through love. That distance is the very reason that it keeps disclosing to us that there is more to it. And in that way, the nothingness is clearing a space and makes room for questioning and questing. And I think as we like follow through these through lines and things, the companionship of not quiteness, because it's always then like showing us, what we had in mind about the world is transforming and changing, and I'm myself also transforming because I'm now getting a moreness, like a newness, and it's not given in complete sets as well. It's relational, and I feel like that nothingness has to be built into relationship in some profound way. And I think it is built into that relationship through the disclosuring that nothingness affords.
Nice. Nothingness, the way Heidegger describes it, is very much the primary focal instantiation of distributed reality. It's very much only experienced when the one is experienced as the whole in the presence of the Dasein. So the only way in which we experience nothingness is caught amongst or amidst or in the midst of reality. That's the only way in which you experience nothingness, not like you contemplating or speculating out in a corner and thinking about the void. That's very much not what he means. And the prerequisite of mood and state and condition. He would talk about how to be in the presence of the nothing, you need to be bored. Like that's just one thing that he would say as well. But yeah, attunement would be the word. We had a back and forth about engagement before, and the importance of engagement as a precondition of knowledge, like engagement as distinct from mere attendance to something waywardly. Attunement would be a key word for understanding and experiencing nothingness.
Yeah. And we're kind of first uncovering the ways in which Heidegger is commensurate with Plato, but it's when talking about Heidegger, I think also important to bring up that, how Heidegger really felt about Plato. He was very critical in a very radical phenomenological way. He thought that Plato's conception of the forms was like the radical shift away from aletheia to orthotes, which is like that correctness or correspondence between intellect and object perception, almost that representationalism. And that is something that I was struggling with a bit earlier when I was doing the Platonic adduction. I was almost getting to a place where it's like correspondence of the form in the mind with like the object in the world. And I kind of wanted to, like, knowing that critique, wanted to steer away from it. But yeah, it was curious to me when I was, reading about this, and I had this question of how can Plato's philosophy, which is giving us a account of reality that is enduring and speaks to realms of life that are persistent through like the flux of nature, how can that be a fundamental misinterpretation of the truth of things as Heidegger would have it? And that's just like interphenomenology. Like you're breaking the grounds that you thought you knew, and we're radically having to reappraise not only our philosophy and our metaphysics, but our perception, and like how down the stack you're going to get to that place was amazing. And the only thing that made it more amazing was to find the conformity again between the Heideggerian position, and even to see aletheia as what's coming through in that moment of aporia, where your wits run out, where you have nothing left to say, and you're kind of left in that silence, almost in a bored silence, but you're not, like TikTok bored. You're bored of the words because the words are not needed to say anything more.
You're not bored of this or that, you're bored full stop, and yeah, like malaise, right? Malaise as being a precondition for this type of attunement, feeling like it's not the void, but there is a slipping away of the whole that is experienced when you experience reality simultaneously at its most profound. I guess there's a chip on your shoulder element to all of this as well, in lived reality and experience, and how it's kind of easy and common to say, but it's only in moments where you find yourself feeling and actually being inconsequential or impotent with regards to the challenge or to existence, that the actual importance of being is realized as well, which is kind of Dostoevskian as well. When I think of the underground man, like that's very much the image that comes to mind of someone he's an unhealthy version of someone who's falling in love and reveling in his own suffering. But what if you could like not just love that you're suffering, but love suffering? Like, I don't know. It's almost the same thing, but it's like almost the exact opposite as well.
Yeah. And maybe we can start to draw this to a close. One thing that stands out to me, and this is again like still along the lines of Plato and Heidegger and nothingness. When like one of Aristotle's objections to the theory of the forms and this is something that we haven't got to and that we won't get to, but it's not entirely relevant to get to. No, we'll address it. But yeah, just he thought that Plato's idea of participation was a little bit flaky, that didn't have any real grounds or couldn't really be defined when you thought about it, and how we participate in the forms, or how, like, someone being nice to someone or being kind is participating in the form of the good. He was kind of really questioning that. And as I was thinking about it, it's and more just a symbol or a reflection of what we've been talking about the last 15 minutes. It's that when you're doing a good act, are you participating in a part or a whole of the good? And I would say you're participating in a whole of the good in the WHOLE, but also in the HOLE, the whole of the good. What's lacking in the good is you're bringing it into experience. And I think this is also what Alfred North Whitehead gets to in his metaphysics as well, and in his eternal objects, is they have less of an ontological status to something like the forms, because they are only made real, or their potential is only actualized through the occasions of experience that we have. So I think there's something very connective about the way that the forms are integrating that lack or nothingness or depravity that keeps them open to that continual disclosure, and that they are in one sense the whole of something, but also like the lacking whole of another in one and the same thing. That's just their ontology, is they give meaning to both sides of that equation.
And in that Whiteheadian schema, you can only give meaning to both. Otherwise, you're not giving meaning to either. And it's funny that you use the word, I know you just said it tentatively, but flaky, in terms of the condition of the Platonic idea of participation. I think Plato, again in the Symposium, he doesn't say it anywhere, but just in interpretations and readings I've studied of the Symposium, it's acknowledged increasingly that the mode of participation, the faculties that are invoked in the Platonic sense when you are coming to being, are a beginning and deeply stabilizing. So it can be and come across as flaky, but it's a beginning, like with Aristotle, I almost feel like you come to the party and like you're an end product, and that product may be good or bad or lacking or amazing and supreme, but I can point to it and it's more stable. With Plato, it's very much you come with for lack of a better word, openness. Like you're there deeply destabilized and happy about that, and will continue to be. And when the beginning matures and saturates into an end, you will still be that same destable, like Dasein.
Yeah. I was listening to a podcast, a recent one with Matthew Segal and Graham Harmon, who is in deep discourse with Heidegger and in deep discourse with what we've been saying about objects not being things in themselves, but things beyond themselves, with his object-oriented ontology. There was a great moment in that where Matt Segal joked, and it was along these lines that they were talking, and said, yeah, like there's a title there that needs to be written, In Defense of Vagueness is what the book needs to be called. And at what point do we need all our concepts reified, and again, like cutting ourselves off from reality? That's a whole other thing. But appreciating the almost vagueness and feltness and realness and transcendence that there is just in first-hand being.
Yeah, and this
And
is very
that's felt, the Graham Harman point, that's not just felt in us, that's felt in the objects too. The objects also don't know themselves.
Yeah, I know. I very much know, man, what you mean. And just to bring this back down to earth and to close the loop on a lot of these things, I personally have been experiencing so much comfort in uncertainty that previously would have really plagued me and brought me down and ailed me. So I also think it's a mark of general growth and moving, like the continual disclosure idea, moving more deeply into the world as a being to be like famously, a lot of philosophy is just the ability to handle increasingly abstract amounts of paradoxes and live with it. But yeah, can you live with the deepest truths of reality being nebulous? Can you do that? And can you continue to exist and continue to exist to higher planes because of that, not live in spite of that, So yeah, I think the idea of in defense of vagueness is a perfect title. And I really resonate with the idea of not living in spite of uncertainty, but loving life because of uncertainty. So that's just kind of a more personal and anecdotal closure for me.
We're there. We're there.
Did we crack it? Did we solve the metaphysics? Who won, do you think? I think if I would have said at the start, like, I'm team Aristotle or Plato, I definitely would have gone with Aristotle. And I switched teams like a very illegitimate fan of a soccer team, like within these 2 hours or so. I very much just went wishy-washy, but I think I'm back on team Aristotle, I reckon. Somehow. You know what it is? I just don't like the guy. I just don't like Plato. There's something about him that's not appealing to me. Something about the character that is Aristotle is very warm. It's very his coldness is his warmth, not to sound like needlessly cryptic, but the fact that he has people, has systems, has modes and thoughts that he likes and dislikes, I can trust the guy, There's like a real sort of judgment, discernment element to Aristotle, which I really enjoy. So I can clearly see where he begins and where he stops. And that's just a human limitation because he's not omnipotent. He's a human being guy. So I feel comfortable with him, and I would say I'm team Aristotle. How about you, sir?
I love that. I am...
Give the viewers what they want.
Yeah, I was like, do I need a pick right now? I'm team Plato.
One for Aristotle. Plato. Comment down below.
I mean, and only because to answer that question, I have to say it in complete irony. And if I'm saying something in complete irony, then I'm back in Plato land.
True philosopher style once again. Yeah, I know. Yeah, this was really enjoyable, man. I think we got the furthest we've got in any conversation, maybe including in real life almost as well. I'm surprised we were able to get all of this, on camera. So that's really impressive. It's really fun, and I felt like continuous unfolding as we were talking, and very much engaged in something that was both us and between and above us simultaneously, and pulling us, in a very good, healthy, vital way. So this was very enjoyable as far as the topic is, because you can just kind of riff on it endlessly and reach a conclusion if you want to. You just check out and cash out wherever you want and then go live your life. You can also just senselessly or sensibly engage, pun not intended, engage in these topics, and to do so with yourself is a high honor.
Yeah, right back at you. It's such a privilege to have done this with you, and I agree. There was a lot of depth here, and some of the ways it's afforded by just that state that we're able to reach of, and the state that is a non-state, the state that is a processual dialectic of disclosure and attunement to the there and not there-ness of the things we talk about. Doing this has been super valuable and will also help us. And thank you for bringing us back to Aristotle. Thank you for voting for Aristotle. I'm glad. We are gonna be able to know his forms a lot deeper. And he was the student of Plato, so there's going to be that same reflection within Aristotle, and this conversation is only going to set us up better to go deeper into Aristotle. There's a few things that we left out, namely Aristotle's definitive critiques of Plato, Alfred North Whitehead's bringing together of Plato and Aristotle in a deep and profound ontological move, and even in some of the work we see today in Michael Levin's work, which is again going a little bit back to Plato and finding that Platonic morphospace of bioelectricity that is giving rise to novel forms in actuality, which is not reducible to the genetic and material constructs. So there's a lot of interesting ideas still percolating here, and look forward to picking up on some of them, but also getting into the next book and the metaphysics.
Book beta will be next, and we are not beta, so we should probably just skip over it entirely. But this was really, really engrossing for me. I think I can't remember the last time I had a conversation like this that was so captivating. So that's thank you for your time and for your effort. And there are some loose ends that I think won't remain loose for too long. Like, we'll just weave them in. I got through pretty much everything I wanted to say. I guess I had a little thing I was going to say about Wittgenstein, which can wait. And brain science as well. I'd like to invoke and bring up more contemporary stuff, and how there's been a revivification of some ideas, or a continuation and a progression of other ideas, and how they've been consecrated in modern times through ways that could not have possibly been expected 2,700 years ago or 2,300 years ago. So I look forward to engaging more and more in fusion and weaving with you, and we'll do so starting next week with next week's episode in book beta. And to those of you watching, it's a pleasure and a privilege as always. Don't forget to like, subscribe, do your thing. This is going to be an ongoing series. This is a really long book now that I'm looking at it. We've gotten through some of the meaty chunks, but there's a lot still to uncover and unpack, and we'll take our time and space with it. So hopefully you'll stick with us for the ride. So thank you all for your time.